Hey kids, Pastor Brian again, and we're going to continue in our Little Pilgrims Progress. We've only got a few chapters left. We're on chapter 40 today. This one's called The Flatterer and His Net. It says, the boys were talking together about little faith and his troubles when they came to a place where the road led out of the way of the king in such a manner that it was difficult to see which path was the right one. If you stood on one side of the road, the right-hand path seemed to be straight. But if you crossed over the other side, the left-hand path looked quite straight also. I don't know which is right, said Christian, and they stood still to consider. Now the shepherds had given the children a little map, and if they had looked at it, they would have seen at once which path to take. But instead of doing this, they began to waste their time by crossing the road from side to side, trying to find out for themselves which is the straighter of two paths. Presently, a man came up behind them. His face was dark and ugly, but wore a white robe, and the children supposed he was a pilgrim. What's the matter? He asked. You seem to be very much puzzled. Oh, replied Christian, we were going to the king's city, and we cannot make out which of these paths is the right one. The man laughed. Is that all? He said. You need not to look so troubled about it. I'm going to the celestial city myself. Follow me, and I will show you the way. So without waiting to be sure that the man was really a pilgrim, Christian and Hopeful followed him. But very soon they discovered their mistake. For instead of looking toward the celestial city, they found they were going back to the Delectable Mountains. This path is not straight, I am sure, exclaimed Christian. Hopeful stopped at once. Don't you think it is? He said in a frightened voice. No, we ought to be looking for the other way. See, these are the hills where we were walking this morning. This path is leading us back to them. This man has deceived us, said Hopeful. We must turn back again. But perhaps he will run after us and kill us. He cannot be a real pilgrim. I don't know, said Christian. I wish we had not followed him. Let us run away. And the boys turned around hastily, but at that moment the man turned also, and before they had time to take a single step toward the way of the king, they found themselves entangled in a large net, which was thrown over them. They fell on the ground, crying aloud for help, but the man only laughed and walked away. Then his white robe slipped from his shoulders, and they saw that he was a servant of the wicked prince, and had dressed himself like a pilgrim in order to deceive anyone who would listen to him. Christian and Hopeful struggled hard to free themselves from the dreadful net, but the more they pulled at it, the tighter it became, and at last they were forced to lie still together, thinking how foolish they had been. That man must be the flatterer, said Christian, and the shepherd told us not to listen to him. Yes, and we never looked at the map that they gave us. We are very bad pilgrims, sobbed Christian. We are always doing naughty things. If only the king would save us this once. I don't think we shall ever be so foolish again. Chapter 41. The little pilgrims are rescued by the Shining One. The little pilgrims begin to fear that they would have to spend the night beneath the net of the flatterer. And perhaps, said Christian, he has gone to tell the wicked prince. He will send his soldiers to carry us away. Just when the sun was setting, the children heard footsteps coming nearer and nearer. And even Hopeful could not help trembling. But only one man came in sight, and they knew by his shining garments and gentle face he was really one of the king's servants. When he saw the pilgrims, he stopped. How did you get into this net? He asked. We were puzzled, said Christian, and we could not make out which way to take. Then a man with a white robe came to us and told us he was going to the celestial city, so we followed him. It was the flatterer, said the king's servant, and he stooped down and tore the net into pieces. And Christian and Hopeful were soon able to creep out of it, and they stood upon the path before him, waiting until he should tell them what to do. His face was grave, and Christian remembered how evangelists had always looked at him the same way. When he found him wandering among the terrible rocks, when he found him wandering among the terrible rocks, the Shining One turned toward the way of the king and bade the boys to come after him. Christian slipped his hand into Hopeful's, and they walked on together. Then they were once more on the right path. The Shining One stopped. "Where did you sleep last night?" he asked. "With the shepherds upon the mountains. Did they not give you a little map of the way?" "Yes," said the boys, and they hung their heads, for they were very much ashamed. Did you look at your map? Did you look at your map when you were puzzled?" "No," whispered Hopeful, and Christian added, "We forgot." "And what else did the shepherds say to you? Did they warn you about the flatterer?" "They told us that we were not to listen to him, and yet you did listen to him. How was that?" "We did not think that man could be the flatterer because he spoke so kindly to us." The tears were running down the little pilgrim's cheeks, and the Shining One laid his hands upon their shoulders and spoke gently to them. "You have been very foolish," he said, "but I think you are very sorry." "We are very, very sorry," sobbed poor little Christian, "and it was more my fault than Hopeful's." "No," said the Shining One, "you were both wrong. If the king had not sent me to look for you, you might have been killed or carried away by the soldiers of the wicked prince. But although the king has sent his servants to seek for the lost children and bring them back on the right path, he was not pleased with them, and he has commanded the Shining One to punish them for their foolishness." "The king will forgive you," he said, "but I shall be obliged to punish you because you have now been pilgrims for a long time, and you would not have lost your way if you had done as the shepherd told you." Then Christian and Hopeful saw that he held a little whip in his hand, and with it he struck them both many times. The stroke of the whips hurt them, but they knew they deserved the punishment. When it was over, the Shining One told them that the king would not remember their naughtiness any more. "Our dear prince," he said, "was once a pilgrim, and he has not forgotten the dangers and the difficulties of the way. He is always watching over you, and when you are careless, he begs his father to forgive you for his sake." Chapter 42, Unbelief. After the Shining One had left, the little pilgrims went steadily on their way, and for 2 or 3 days they met with neither friends nor enemies. They were now crossing into a very wide plain which lay between the Delectable Mountains and the beautiful country with low hills and long valleys. This was marked upon their map as the Land of Delight. Part of the plain was called the Enchanted Ground, and Hopeful reminded Christian that the shepherds had warned them not to fall asleep there. "I had not forgotten," said Christian, "but I am glad you remembered too. We must be careful now, for after this long journey, it will be dreadful if we were carried away like that poor little pilgrim whom we saw the other day." "We will not listen to any more flatterers," said Hopeful. "Is there not a man upon the road before us?" "Yes," said Christian, and his face turned away from the celestial city. "He must be coming to meet us." "I don't think he is one of the Shining Ones," said Hopeful as the man drew near. "No, he has pilgrim's dress, but he's walking the wrong way." The man, whose name was Unbelief, stopped when he met the children and asked them where they were going. He had a pleasant face and a gentle voice, but the boys knew that they must not trust his words. "We are going to the celestial city, the city of the king," said Christian as he answered his question. Unbelief laughed. "You poor little fellows," he said. "Have you really traveled all this long way without finding out the truth?" "What truth?" asked Hopeful. "It is such a tiresome journey," continued Unbelief, "and if you ever get to the end of it, you will only be disappointed." "Why?" Then Unbelief pretended to look sad. "There is no king," he said, "and there is no celestial city." "Oh, but there is," exclaimed Christian, "and we have heard about it from the king's own servants." Unbelief put his hands upon the boy's shoulder and tried to turn him around. "My dear child, you are quite young, and I am growing old. Listen to what I have to say. Long, long ago, I heard the very same story that was told to you, and I left my home and came to look for the king's city." "Well," said Christian, "you will find it soon, will you not?" "No," replied Unbelief. "I have been much further than you have. I have spent 20 years as a pilgrim, and I can find no city at all." Then Christian turned to Hopeful with a very sorrowful face. "Oh, do you think he is speaking the truth?" "No," said Hopeful, "I am sure he is not. Do not listen to him. You know we saw from the city from the delectable. You know what we saw. We saw the city from the Delectable Mountains. Let us make our haste, and the Shining One will have to punish us again." Unbelief stood by, watching the two boys. "Come back with me," he said, "and I will take you safely to your own homes again." But Christian answered him bravely, "You are trying to deceive us, but we do not believe what you are saying. We are quite sure that the king's word is true, and that there is a celestial city. We saw its gates when we were with the shepherds." Unbelief shook his head. "You are mistaken, but you can go and look for it. I'm going back to my own country." "And we are going to the king," replied Christian. And so they went on again. Unbelief laughed at them as he turned away. So you can see that in life there are people that won't believe, even people that may have said they were believers at one time, and they'll try to discourage you in your walk. But you know what? We need to have faith in the Lord and trust in his promises, and remember to keep journeying, keep walking, because Jesus is with us, and he wants us to keep walking the road of faith. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you back next time.